Hi, today we're going to talk about the crimes that caused a town to dread sundown. The Texarkana Phantom Murders, here on Lessons from the Purple Chair. Hi, and welcome back to Lessons from the Purple Chair. One intellectual musings from the comfort of a big purple wingback. I'm your host, Professor Timothy R. Crowe. You know, guys, if you've watched my videos, particularly my one on Jack the Ripper, which was originally on my Big Pretty Man channel, then you know that one of my fascinations, along with world religion, with ancient mysteries and history and paranormal, is true crime. And I particularly love good documentaries on true crime, as well as movies based upon true crime. And one of my absolute favorites is the 1975 Charles Pierce classic, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Charles Pierce also made one of my favorite false documentaries, fake-umentaries as they call them, long before the Blair Witch Project, and that would have been The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is about a Bigfoot, the folk monster, a Bigfoot-like creature living down in Folk, Arkansas. It's an absolute classic. If you haven't seen it, definitely look it up. But with The Town That Dreaded Sundown, he makes the statement, all the details of this film are absolutely true. Well, however, they weren't. They were very, very loosely based on a true story. He took a lot of creative license with The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And in fact, it is one of the first mass slasher films, about a mass serial killer that came out 3 years before Halloween, which kind of set the standard, and like almost 5 years before before Friday the 13th with Jason. So just like with the fake-umentary, Charles Pierce was ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve when it came to these type of slasher films movies. And the film is based upon the real case of the Texarkana Phantom Murders, which took place between February 22nd and May 3rd of 1946. Now, and that we're going to go over those. Now, these murders took place, for the exception of one, in Lovers Lanes, where people go out and park. Young people go out and park to fool around in their cars. And there were actually 4 attacks on 8 people. Of that 8, 5 were murdered, and the other 3 were very seriously injured. So, and just like Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer, the Phantom Murder was actually never caught. So, you know what? Let's go over each one of the crimes and the key suspects, and I'll throw in my 2 cents, okay? So now the crimes began on February 22nd, 1946, in Texarkana, Arkansas and Texas, the town of Texarkana, which is actually bordering, and the town is even between Texas and the Arkansas border. Almost all of the murders took place and all the crimes took place on the Texas side. And a young man named Jimmy Hollis, who was 25, went on a date with a young lady named Mary Jean Laurie, who was 19. They went to the cinema to see a film, and then afterwards they went and parked in one of the popular Lovers Lanes that were in and around the Texarkana. After being there about 10 minutes, there was a knock on their window. Someone actually flashed a flashlight in the window, and they both looked to see a man with what they described like a pillowcase over his head with the eyes cut out, which is where the movie gets the image of the famous Phantom Killer. And in fact, these 2 were the only living witnesses to actually to see the Phantom, to see this killer. He ordered them to get out of the car, and at first they thought it was a joke. And he was like, "I don't want to kill you, fella." And they got out of the car. They both described him a little differently. Jimmy said that he was a man about 6 feet tall. They both agreed on the height. And he said that he was a white, from what he could tell, he was a white man with a bit of a tan. However, Mary Jean Laurie said that she thought he was African American. So either way, they get out of the car, and he orders Jimmy to pull his pants off. And he said, "Take off your britches." So he maybe did, which is an odd order. Maybe he was trying to, to disable him, to incapacitate him. It's kind of an odd request. But Jimmy, of course, did this. And the minute that he did, he had a pistol, and he struck Jimmy in the head twice. In fact, he struck him so hard he cracked his skull. And actually, in fact, it was such a savage blow that Mary Laurie thought that he had shot him, but what she was hearing was the cracking of his skull. Yeah. So, Jimmy's put out. He then ordered Mary to run. And he actually kind of reached out and he struck her with a blunt object. We believe it was with the flashlight he had. And then he told her to run. Well, she started running toward the woods, and he said, "No, run up the road." So she starts running up the road, and she said she did see another car, ran toward it. There was no one in it. The doors were locked. She kept running up the road. Well, he ran up and caught up with her, and he asked her, "Why are you running?" And, and then he assaulted her, and he did not rape her. But he did sexually violate her with the gun. And she then jumped up and ran away. She managed to run to a nearby house where she called the police. They were both taken to the hospital. As I said, Jimmy had suffered some major trauma to his skull. It actually cracked his skull. He was in the hospital for quite a while. But they both did survive, with some very obvious both psychological and physical damage. Now, the next attack came on March 24th, and so a couple one morning, a man found a car parked on the side of the road. He got out and checked it. It was early in the morning, and he found that inside was the body of two people. They were identified as Richard Griffin, who was 29, and Polly Moore, who was 17. Apparently, they had been dating. They were found on U.S. Highway 67, and both were dead. One was dead in the front seat, the other was dead in the back seat. And they had both been shot with a .32 caliber pistol, same type of pistol that was described by the earlier couple. And it does appear that perhaps they had been pulled out of the car and then placed back in the car. At least Polly Ann Moore, because she had been, because they looked like they'd been pulled out on a blanket and then pushed back in the car. Now, we're not sure if there was any type of sexual assault on the lady. Because there don't seem to have been a coroner's report or any type of pathology report, at least none that have survived. So it's unclear whether or not she was sexually assaulted. Both of their pockets had been turned out, indicating that perhaps they had been robbed. Now, the third round of murders took place on April 14th, 1946. A couple one morning saw a young man laying in the edge of the left-hand side of the road, off of North Park Road, which is just outside of Texarkana. And upon inspection, they found that this young man was dead and had been shot 4 times. His name had been Paul Martin, and he was 17 years old, and he had been on a date, actually, with Betty Jo Booker, who was 15, and who had actually played the saxophone in the local band at the VFW. And she had played the night before, and they had left this dance at the VFW around 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning after the dance was over. And they found Paul Mortem, laying dead beside the road, been shot 4 times. And it looked like he had been shot a little further up from near a fence row, and that he had crawled out in the street. Possibly he had already been shot once or twice, and then once he crawled toward the road, someone had finished him off. Search was done, and for Betty Jo Booker, and she was found a few miles away, like about two and a half miles away, near a tree, and she had been shot twice in the face and killed. There was no sign. Both were fully clothed. There was no signs of any type of sexual assault, but just some extreme violence. Their car was found another mile from, kind of in between the two. The details, it's kind of hard to tell what happened. It may have been that Paul was shot. They were pulled out of the car. Paul may have tried to run and was shot first, and then he assaulted. He assaulted the young woman, and then he came back. Perhaps Paul was crawling towards the road. He found him was still alive and shot him again and finished him off. That seems like a possible scenario. But these were 4 very brutal murders. So for some very young people. Now, in the town that's dreaded sundown, one of its most famous scenes concerns, the Betty Jo Booker murder. And in that scene, it is that he took her trombone and hooked a knife to it and tied her arms around a tree, and then stood behind her, and he was like, and stabbed her to death that way with the knife. This is pure Hollywood, a pure slasher film thing. It did not happen. In fact, I've even heard in Texarkana, there's a legend that there's a tree in the park where that had actually happened. Well, it didn't happen. In fact, she didn't even play the trombone. She played the saxophone. I don't know how you would stab anybody with a saxophone. Even if you tied a knife to it, that'd be a little more awkward. So this actually didn't happen. In fact, the spot in the road that happened, that this took place and where her body was found, is now the road's all grown up and abandoned. So that is not the spot. But there are people that still think they've seen this movie, even in Texarkana, and they think that that's the way it actually happened. Just like with that trombone thing. Actually, when almost all of it was creative license. Now, the final attack took place on May 3rd, 1946, and this one was a little different from the rest. This is the only one of the attacks that was not on a lover's lane, and actually it was several miles, up to, I think it was like 10 miles outside of Texarkana, and actually on the Arkansas side. And this actually took place at a house. A man named Virgil Sparks, who was 37 years old, was sitting in his chair, listening to the radio, reading his newspaper, and on the window, from the window nearby, suddenly there came 2 shots, and his wife, Katie Sparks, was getting ready for bed, and she stepped in the room just in time to see Virgil had stood up and fell back in his chair with blood. He had been shot twice. Twice in the head. So, and he was dead. She immediately run to the crank phone they had in their house. But from that same window, 2 more shots rang out, and she got hit in the face. In fact, one of them went through her jaw and actually knocked out some of her teeth, and was lodged under her tongue. She was knocked to the ground. She never saw the killer. But she managed to get to her feet. She heard like somebody was trying to come through the back door. She ran out the front door, ran, with blood pouring. She managed to run out the front door and run to a nearby house. No one was home, of her, actually a relative. And then they weren't home. She ran to another house. A man came out with a gun, fired 2 shots in the air, and he saw what was going on. And she was taken to the hospital, and she did survive. So she is one of the only 3 people that survived. However, she never saw the attacker. It was shots that came from the window, and she heard some footsteps, and that was about it. She never saw anyone. Now, this particular attack is the only one that was shown the way it really happened, sort of, or mostly, in the town that dreaded sundown. And in fact, Dawn Wells, who played Mary Ann, who passed away last year, actually played the part, one of the few movie scenes that you see her in. She played the part of Katie Stokes, and but in the movie, he shot through the window with a pistol, and then he burst through the door, and she saw him, and she ran out the back door and crawled through the cornfield and managed to get to the house. That was a bit of its creative license. She actually never saw anyone in real life. But hey, once again, that's Hollywood. So, but after, and a lot of people have speculated that this last murder may have not been the Phantom Killer, because it didn't quite match his MO. This one was not Lover's Lane. It was not younger people. There was none of this. This was none of this like type of harassing attack or personal attack. This seems to have been done at a distance. It was also done at a house. It is a bit outside of town. It is on the Arkansas side. And also, unlike in the movie, it appears that a .22 rifle was used, whereas all of the other murders and the first attack that they survived, he had a .32 caliber. Suddenly, this is a different gun. Now, a lot of people feel that, and even the police at the time felt that this same killer was responsible for this attack, and they likened his slight change to the fact that because of the murders, there was a lot of police activity on it. I will say one thing: the cops are really on this, and they even they were checking these lovers' lanes closely. They've even putting up recruiting young people to sit in cars where they as bait while they hid in the brush. So the heat was really on, and he may have made this attack at the outside of town out of necessity. Because the heat was just too on inside, at the lovers' lanes in his normal hunting ground. That is a very strong possibility. However, it is interesting that suddenly he uses a different gun and a different approach. There was some speculation that Virgil had been killed because of there was rumors that he had been having an affair with a relative's wife, and that this may have been a retaliation killing. But usually crimes of passion like that are not done from this type of assassination, clandestine. Usually they're much more up close and personal from, with a violent altercation, more domestic violence type of thing. But now it could be that there was a relative that was just that this upset relative may have been a little more cold and calculating. Can't rule it out. I personally think it probably was the killer, the Phantom Killer. Just because of the time period and the attack. But now interestingly, after the Stark attack, this seems to have been the last attack by the Phantom Killer, if indeed that was he was the Phantom Killer that made that attack. But it seems to have been the last. And I will say, like I said before, the police were very much on this. There were hundreds of suspects brought in, anyone with any type of criminal record, the regulars in town that had problems, thousands of interviews. But these murders put this entire town on alert. The town that dreaded sundown, it really was true during between February and May of 1946. People didn't go out. Apparently all the gun stores sold out. All the locks in town sold out. People were putting booby traps around their house. They said you didn't just walk up and knock on anybody's door, at night. You could get shot. Everyone was terrified. They didn't know where this, and especially after the last attack, because the people were like, okay, now he's attacking people in their homes. So, this really heightened the community, and there was a lot of heat on the police to try and solve this. Now, before we go into suspects, I think that just like I did with Jack the Ripper, I would like to give a little bit of a psychological profile as much as we can about this elusive killer. Now, first you have the name. There was a newspaper that actually they had run an ad that same day for a movie called the Phantom, and I guess it's stuck in their mind. So in one of the ads about one of the articles about him attacking someone, they said the Phantom Killer attacks again. Well, that stuck. Suddenly he's now the Phantom Killer. And like Jack the Ripper, and the Zodiac Killer and Son of Sam, once you give a name to an unknown killer, to an unknown killer, then you really up his popularity. And if they don't get caught, they can turn into a legend. And actually, no, even though there was so much research done, there was so much work done on this case, and even they found fingerprints and handprints, because it appears that after Virgil Stark was killed, that the killer went into the house and actually looks like he dipped his hand in the blood and even left handprints and fingerprints on the wall, but none of them ever popped up in any type of ID kit. Apparently, these fingerprints were not on record, which is very interesting. So, what kind of killer was the Phantom Killer? It's a little hard to tell with the details of these attacks. Once again, only 3 people survived the attacks, and Katie Stark actually never saw anything. Just heard footsteps, so she had no real interaction with the Phantom Killer, if it was the Phantom Killer. Only the two Jimmy Hollis and Mary Laurie were the only ones that had interaction with this killer. So that's really all we have to go over, as well as the crime scenes. And even though initially it looks like it would be a type of robbery, pockets were turned out, things like that, but it doesn't seem to be the motive. For one thing, these are a bunch of kids. How much money are you going to get off a bunch of kids? And the cars weren't stolen. The girls' purses weren't taken. So robbery does not seem to be the motive. The motive seems to have been an outlet of violence, and even sexual violence. Even though I think it's very interesting, is we don't know with the Griffin Moore attack, but it doesn't seem that he raped any of these women, except for the sexual assault with the gun on Laurie, the first 2 victims. So it does seem that these are sexually motivated. However, there doesn't seem to have been an actual rape. So that makes me question, what kind of killer really is this? Is it sexually motivated? It seems more violence motivated. Also, if the interaction, this cat and mouse that he played with Laurie, when having her run up the road, chasing her down, saying, "Why are you running?" This is a control type of thing, just like rapists are in control, for the power and control. This seems to be a power trip with him. And the violence, I think that he got off on violence, and it was a very sadistic personality. I would probably, and one thing we can say about these crimes is that they're very well organized. They're very well planned. Even the police said he leaves no trace other than these, and he seems to have probably stalked these people. He knew they were there. None of them reported seeing other cars come by. So apparently, he had stalked and followed these people. He had his gun, he had his flashlight, he had his mask. He was very prepared. This is a very prepared killer, and I think he more fits the bill of a sociopathic killer. Because he obviously had a lot of rage, and he had a lot of anger. Even though he's very controlled, it was an outlet for a lot of violence, and he seemed to get off on violence. And this seems to me to more fit someone who is more sociopathic. However, you can't deny that he may have been a psychopath. Because he was never caught. This would probably make him much more organized. So between the two, if he was a sociopath, even though it seems like more of a rage type of attack from a sociopath, it's too well organized. and too well planned. It's more planned like a psychopathic killer. If you saw my video on Jack the Ripper, there was a big difference. Sociopaths are more, they have no respect for rules and laws. They have a hard time functioning in society, and a lot of their crimes are brought about by anger and outbursts. These are your spree killer types. These are, your violent rapist types. And even though his actions fit that bill, it's more like a psychopath. A psychopath has absolutely no conscience. But they see humans as nothing more than animate objects, not people, and something to be used for their gain. They only recognize their own needs. However, they are very good at following rules. They can understand rules and laws. They can't understand emotions, and they fake emotions. They're chameleons for it. But they're also, a lot of times, they are very organized. They often are married. They often have children, but they also have this other side. And the family doesn't know that all that emotion is surface. It's not real, but because it's part of a part they play. I think that the organization given to the Texarkana Phantom Killer more matches a organized psychopath who apparently had a lot of inner anger and rage and was really sadistic. He got off on the power of violence, which makes him a very dangerous individual. Okay, so now let's talk about the main suspects. And really, there were, even though they did hundreds of interviews, checked thousands of leads, really it came down to two basic suspects. And the one that the police believe was the actual Phantom Killer was a man named Yole Sweeney. Now, Yole Sweeney was a petty thief, a car thief. He was a career criminal, but mostly it was over theft. He was a car thief. He was a thief. In fact, he had been a record as long as your arm, and he had been in and out of prison and out of jail. A very sociopathic personality. He just didn't, somebody that could not function very well in regular society without crime. However, there doesn't seem to be a lot of violence with Yole Sweeney. However, he had stolen a car, and he just married his girlfriend, Peggy, on the day that she got caught with the car. They both got caught, and Peggy gave a very interesting testimony that Yule had been the one that had killed Griffin and Moore, and she went into great detail on this murder. And though investigators felt like that she was leaving out a lot, probably trying to make herself look innocent, like she was just a bystander in it, maybe she had been involved, but a lot of her details seemed to check out, seemed to be things that nobody could have known unless they was at the crime scene, and it pretty much, and it did follow the scene of the crime. It matched. Also, the same thing, she said that he had attacked the Booker Martin, and one of her details about how Martin was shot does match. That he had she'd shot him twice, come back, and then shot him again. That he took the girl off, and he said he tried to get some, but then he killed her. But also, she gave a detail that only the police knew, and that was that there had been a day planner had been thrown in the weeds in one of these crimes, and that had been found by the police, but had never been reported. So she seemed to know details about these murders that nobody else could know. However, because she later recanted this confession, said it wasn't true, and because they were now married, she couldn't be forced. It's part of the law. She could not be forced to testify against her husband. So they had nothing to really get Sweeney on. However, Sweeney had committed was such a repeat offender that for the car theft, he actually got life in prison as a repeat criminal and offender. So he went on to jail. A lot of people claim that it was a plea deal rather than being charged with these murders. Though there's no real documentation for that. It actually doesn't make sense. They didn't have anything on him except for this recanted confession. Though the police did feel like that he was the guy. In truth, I have questions on this. So for one, Yule Sweeney he is sort of a sociopathic personality as far as, or I should say not sociopath, an antisocial personality. He doesn't function well in society. He had been a career criminal, but the thing is, he was mostly a thief, and a robber and that type of thing. There doesn't seem to be any real history or tendencies toward violence. And whoever the Phantom Killer was a very violent man. Was a very sadistic, violent man that got off on power and control. It doesn't seem to fit Sweeney and his crimes. And there are no other murders associated with him before this. Now, then it comes up, well, how did Peggy get these details? Well, it's very hard to tell. These murders are, now like 70 years old. So, but I'm very curious as to how during those interviews, these interviews went. Because a lot of times, inadvertently, a lot of these interviewers will actually coax them to talk and end up giving away details. Some of these detectives and these cops, and the one. So, and I really wonder how these interviews went. If they didn't either purposely or accidentally feed her information. Like about the way he was shot and about the day planner. Also, there's another possibility that they were car thieves. They may have come along and found these cars abandoned and found the murderers, found them murdered and then took off. And therefore, she may have seen the planner on the side. She may have seen that he was shot. And, out of fear of being arrested and maybe trying to distance herself from Sweeney, she made up this story. Oh, I know, to try and free herself. It's a possibility because there's just something not right here. I've never really been comfortable with the entire confession by Peggy Sweeney, and it just doesn't seem to fit Yule Sweeney, his character and his background. Yule Sweeney actually did serve time until 1973, the 1970s, things of 73. And on a technicality about his sentence and his representation, he was actually released, even though he went right back to having trouble with the law. He actually had a stroke and ended up in a nursing home, and he died in 1994. He died in an old folks home. And he denied to his dying day, he'd brag about his other crimes, his car thefts and and robberies and things like that, but he denied to the end that he was the Phantom Killer. Now, the next named suspect, the one named the most after Sweeney, was actually a young man named H.B. Doody Tennyson. And this young man was an 18-year-old university student, a freshman, and he committed suicide, and he left behind a suicide note claiming that he had killed Booker Martin and the Starks, and that's the reason he was killing himself. Now, this was a young kid. Now, he did have some connections to some of the murder victims. He had actually went to high school with Booker, and actually played in the same band with her, and so he would have been at the VFW. So he had that connection, and also he worked at the local cinema, which most of these Lover's Lane victims had been to the movies before they went to the Lover's Lane. So he had that opportunity. So it'd been very easy for him to know who was leaving the cinema, who was together, and then to troll them and follow them. So that so he did have opportunity, and he did have a connection there. However, there's no other connection to be found, and in fact, a friend of his had said that during the Stark murders, he had actually been with him. And that they'd heard it on the radio, So the report on the radio about the murders, and they were together listening to it. So we know he didn't do that one. And there's no evidence, and he never gave any testimony. He said there was no other connection other than this confession, and and the fact that he had a very tenuous connection to some of the victims. With Booker and the band, and seeing these people leaving the cinema. Why? A lot of times suicide victims will create stories, hoping for some sort of later notoriety, and that type of mindset. So, but I personally don't think, and we know he didn't kill Virgil Starks. And I don't think that he killed the others as well. I think that for whatever reasons he made this claim, maybe seeking some sort of, post-mortem fame. Who knows what's in the head of a young man that would do such a thing to himself. But I don't buy that. They asked the question, did Duty do it? No, I don't think Duty did. So here at the end, who do I think that was the Phantom Killer? Do I think it was Yole Sweeney? Do I think it was Tennyson? In truth, Tennyson, as I said, I can completely rule out. There is some circumstantial evidence for Yole Sweeney, but in my opinion, looking at studying a lot of psychological abnormal behavior, serial killers, sociopaths, psychopaths, and the serial killer patterns in psychology, Yole Sweeney just to me does not fit, and I'm not comfortable, never have been with this confession. There's just something not right there. My first opinion is that no, I don't think, my first instinct, not an assumption, but based on the evidence and based on the confessions and based on Sweeney's known character and prior crimes, I don't think that he fits the bill for a serial killer. I really don't. So I really don't believe that Yole Sweeney was the Phantom Killer. Also, I would note something else. In the Stark killings, there was fingerprints left around on the walls around the room that didn't match Sweeney, and also Sweeney we know for the Booker Mortem murders. We have evidence that they were actually sleeping in their car in San Antonio, Texas that night. So he couldn't have done that one, even though she confessed that he did. So that contradicts the confession. So in the long run, I don't think that Yole Sweeney is the killer, and obviously Tennyson was the killer. In my opinion, the Phantom Killer was never identified, and he actually got away with it. Now, why did he suddenly stop? We'll never know. He could have died. He could have been convicted for another crime, the way Sweeney went to prison. He could have moved away. He could have moved to another area. We'll never know. Serial killers don't stop killing, so therefore it has to be one of these alternatives. He moved, he died, he was incarcerated. He was incarcerated for something else. But in my opinion, none of the suspects, including Sweeney, really matched the MO for the Phantom Killer. And I think that the Phantom Killer has just done that. He's become a phantom lost to time, and now we'll never know who it was. Okay, folks, that's all I've got on the Phantom Killer and the basis of the town that dreaded sundown. Take it with a grain of salt, for my opinion. And if you have any opinion on this famous case, I would love to hear it. Shoot me a line down below. And while you're at it, hit this little purple chair and give me a like and give me a subscribe. I'd love to have you on board. I'd like to see this channel grow some more. All right. So until next time, find yourself a comfy chair, find yourself a good book, and find your passion. Until next time, later.